Welcome to Sugar and Silk, a unique boxing podcast brought to you exclusively by Ace Podcast Nation. My name is Ben Doughty.
My name is Michael Silkolajde. How you doing?
What's up? What's up, Silk? It seems kind of quiet in here since we downsized, and it's just me and you chewing the fat again.
We downsized and downgraded.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's a little bit. It's going to be a little bit quieter. We'll obviously our voices will be heard a little bit more, and we have one discerning opinion that unfortunately won't be able to hear anymore. But c'est la vie, such is life. We must carry on.
Indeed, we forge ahead regardless. I wanted to talk to you this show about the rematch between Joe Joyce and Zhilei Zhang at London's O2 Arena this coming Saturday. The reason being, normally we might preview that fight on the Friday show, but I don't think we're going to do a show on Friday. And if you do the show, you'll be doing it on your own with an illustrious guest, perhaps. So I figured we could talk about it now. Now, you know what, Silk? Sometimes, most of the time, and I know a man like you who's a boxing professor and a guru of the sweet science, most of the time you will be very technical about your reasons for a prediction on any fight, and you will really go into it deeply, and you will lose a lot of people with your knowledge and analysis on the way. But do you sometimes get gut feelings? Because I have a gut feeling this time that Joyce will avenge the loss, even though technically Zhang should be able to beat him again.
Yeah, I believe that Zhang is going to beat him again, and possibly even worse.
See, this is the thing. So this is the scenario. Sometimes when you have a rematch, particularly when you look at the nature of the first loss, where he bust him up and stopped him in 6 rounds, closed his face. He never discouraged Joyce, so he never broke his spirit, and Joyce never stopped trying to win. There's no quitting Joe Joyce. But he kind of did a number on him, Zhang. He came into his backyard and did a number on him. Now, when you see something like that, they either beat them even worse the second time. And I do remember reading the Maxim Boxing News when they said, they were talking about Mancini Bramble, right, way back in the day. And ahead of the rematch, they said, any guy that is stopped badly in the first fight seldom wins the rematch. But sometimes we've seen examples where they do. And my gut feeling is Joyce, I watched it again before we came on air. I think Joyce is a fight he can win. We've seen big turnarounds in rematches lately, right? You had, when Gary was riding high on the success of his prediction for Eubank versus Smith, when that looked like, we've only got Liam Smith's word for it. That was him and not his twin brother, like a lost Smith twin that we never even knew about, who can't box for toffee. So different was he. Now, Zhang, I don't know his temperament, and I don't really know. I've seen him fight a couple of times. I don't know what his team and setup is like, really. I don't know how his camp's been.
We do know, Ben. We do know his pedigree. We know his pedigree is deep in the amateurs, and he doesn't deviate from what he does. So he's not going to be worse. He may not even be better. He will be more confident. He'll have looked at the video and say, I could have done this, I could have done that, I should have done this then, blah, blah, blah. That will make him better. Now, on the other half, I don't know. It looks pretty scary for him. Is he going to be able to put together those types of attributes that quickly in order to make a difference against?
Well, you talk about adjustments, right, Silk? You talk about adjustments because if we look, and as the show goes on, perhaps we'll look at some iconic rematches and the ones that were reinforced the original result and the ones that were overturned and avenged. When you look at making adjustments to try and do better than you did last time, I think we've got to be realistic, like you just acknowledged, the adjustments that Joe Joyce, with his relatively limited skill set and the age he is about 37, he actually can make in that kind of time frame. To me, I watched it again, as I say, I think Joyce needs to stay close to him. He needs to take that range away, and he needs to fight at a pace that Zhang is not comfortable with. Zhang not being a spring chicken at 39, pushing 40 either. And I think he needs to fight inside. I think he needs to forget about that pouring. When they play the pouring with the lead hands game with a southpaw, I think he needs to stop giving him time. He's not to stop giving him distance. Joyce needs to tighten his defense a bit. I don't expect him to get the head movement of Nicolino Loche or Wilfred Benitez in the interim. So I think he needs to keep his hands up like the stone wall, not a bit tighter than last time. And I think he needs to try and suffocate him.
All they do, really, when they do that, Ben, all they do is they just blind themselves. And it's a false sense of security. And every single fighter that does it, with the exception maybe Winky Wright, but it also hurts the offense. You know what I mean?
I was just coming at you with Winky Wright there. That's bang.
with the exception of Winky. Now, Winky made it work, but again, it still hurt him against certain opponents as well because guys that are busy, he can't get his hands away from his head. You know what I mean? He won't take that chance.
Interesting. Who else did that? While we're talking about that, who else employed that stone wall style at elite level other than Winky Wright? You got me thinking now.
I know, like sort of like Buster Drayton sort of did it. He kept his hands exceedingly high. A lot of guys keep.
I saw Arthur Abrams do it, but whether how much of an elite fighter you would describe Arthur Abrams as it is open to a little bit of debate and conjecture.
Yeah,
but he would use it too. I'm
trying to think that use it, and it's also because like people think keeping your hands up is your defense. It's not your defense at all. It has absolutely nothing to do with your defense. If anything, it may help you with your offense because you know the shortest line between A and B is a straight line. So if your hands up here and you reach out, it's just a shorter period, a distance to get to your opponent. I could see that. Defense, it doesn't help.
So what about when you were on the ropes, right? Or you were under fire, whether willingly on the ropes and trying to draw the fire, or you were under pressure. Didn't you do this sometimes? Or you cover up like that?
Certain scenarios you do. Certain scenarios you do. You make a guy. You stop a guy and make him think because he has to punch around your hands or punch in between them, and that split second of decision allows. But the one thing you want to do when you're fighting defense, the best thing to do is for your opponent not to be able to touch you at all. Forget about if he's hitting your arms and he's hitting your hands and he's calculating. And if he's an intelligent fighter, he's calculating and he's going to end up finding a way around that guard. He'll find a way through because it's just impossible to not.
So fresh air is always more preferable, yeah? Fresh air.
Yeah, I think so. It's always better like people, when I teach them boxing, or even when I'm teaching them for fitness, I'm like, know where your hands are. If you know where your hands are, then you can practice defense and offense. You got half the game down. Half the problems when you know where your hands are going to be like eradicated. Just because you know when your hands are here or here, wherever they are, you have to use them. You have to see your opponent's hands. So not only you know where your hands are, but know where your opponent's hands are. And then at that point, then you could start. He can only hit you with those two things, the left or the right, right? So if you know where his hands are right away, knowing that your head is, you're never dead center, you're always offline. Yeah. Those kinds of things. It's just you don't even have to work anymore. A lot of fighters' defense, like when we see him slip punch, we say, "Oh, he did this, he did that." It's by accident. It's just because he happens to be moving his head.
Patterns.
Exactly.
So right.
And you have to be able to put down a positive, like a good pattern in the head movement, and you'll make a guy miss at least 75% of his punches.
You know what? That's so true. A lot of the time, and people, sometimes the more casual spectator might see this, they go, "That's amazing. How did he see that coming?" And it's like, say he doesn't see it coming. He has good rhythm and good habits, and it's a moving target. Don't get me wrong. You get some extraordinary fighters who do seem to have that reaction thing, like Donald Curry was one of them who springs to mind. He almost wouldn't move like a statue, wouldn't give anything away till he had to move. Yeah. But most fighters, they establish a pattern where they're moving their head. Now, what you just reminded me, by the way, when you said about he can only throw the left or the right, that reminds me of there was a wonderful old character called Nobby Nobbs who ran a stable of journeymen out of Birmingham, the Midlands in the UK. And he had this really simple maxim for his fighters defensively. He said, block the left, slip the right. What else can they throw? That was his logic. But getting back to Joyce then, as I said to you, I feel he has to fight at a high pace. I realise all these things are easier said than done, but he has to fight at a high pace. And I think he has to fight on the inside as much as possible at close range. And he has to kind of harrow and harass Zhang out of his comfort zone. The advantage Joyce has, he is very strong. He has a relentless engine. And obviously, he needs not to get bust up like he did last time, so he can't see out of his, out of his right eye. That's saying.
Yeah, it's going to be impossible unless he's practicing, unless he's learned some sort of defense.
But Michael, if his eye hadn't shut, would he have lost last time when he did? I don't suppose he would have done. So the fight would have gone a little further, right?
And then, but it's supposition to think that Zhang is going to tire out. You know what I mean? Sometimes maybe he was in better shape and he doesn't get tired as long as he's hitting the other guy. Guys get tired when you start hitting them. that's when they get tired. Maybe he wasn't going to get tired at all. I just think something about Joyce is like his punch selection and his combinations are very, very primitive, very, very basic. I
Yeah.
don't know about his amateur pedigree. You know it better than I. If he
He
has
was
that.
Olympic silver medalist, Michael, and they said he was robbed in the final against Tony Yoka.
Wow, that's
Imagine.
crazy.
Yeah,
That's
you
crazy.
didn't expect that, right? But
I have. That absolutely shocks me.
they're
Really.
both silver medalists. So that's the interesting angle. They're both silver medalists. I can see you're looking at that question on the screen, which I think is from Simon at Ace Podcast Nation. He says, "Who had the best head movement of all time, in your or my opinion?" Do you want to answer that while we keep our thoughts in mind about George Zhang?
I mean, contradictorily, right? I mean, it would have to be Benitez that I could think of, or Pernell
Yeah,
Whitaker. Well, Pernell Whitaker.
Whitaker, maybe Benitez there. I mean, Loche. I mean, what do you stand on Nicolino Loche, who looked like a barrel-chested barroom brawler, but
Yeah,
fought so sweet and
yeah,
nonchalant and
yeah,
cocky.
yeah, yeah. He was amazing. His head movement really was sweet, and he was able to throw counters off it. And I don't know a great deal about him. Um, uh, I believe he had like an exceptional number of draws, in his fights, and probably because he wasn't a hard enough puncher to like create that respect, that significant difference between his opponents and himself.
Yeah,
When you don't punch hard, people kind of like they can mess around with decisions, and you don't have the law in your pocket. You don't keep them in your hands. You know what I mean? So I think, but Nicolino, he had incredible vision and he had incredible ability. He wasn't a puncher. I'm sure he took a great shot. I don't know if he was stopped ever at all, but he knew his way around the ring. He was very intelligent. He saw, and again, he kind of like he had so many fights. So when someone punched, he knew what was going to come. Like people are so predictable. They throw the left, they throw the right after it. So a guy who's adept defensively, he knows you go like this, and then you go under, and you know what? 99 times out of 10, you're going to miss.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to say, by the way, we're getting some really good, intelligent contributions on YouTube live right now. I can't read them all, but there's Little Holmes says Benitez was for upper body movement. Pernell had a lot to do with his legs. Lotch had incredible movement, says Wondro. He actually smoked in between rounds. But the reason I mention this is I'm glad that we're getting this engagement on YouTube and people who seem like they understand boxing quite well and they're connoisseurs, which is kind of cool, don't you think?
I think it's absolutely cool, but we do have to take one of the guests to task who said that Whitaker was more legs. Yes, Whitaker had amazing legs, and he was able to drop down into a full squat and make you miss down there. But make no mistake, the head was not where it last was, and that's the reason why the opponent missed.
And also, the thing with Pernell is he was pretty aggressive, really, for a counter-puncher southpaw who's noted for his amazing defense. Pernell liked to go to you, right? You look at a prime Muhammad Ali, he comes out dancing and he makes you come and find him most of the time, right? Most of the time. But Pernell would take the show to you and engage. He wanted to come and get you. He just happened to have amazing upper body movement, and his hands were great too, right? You know, if you like defense with your hands at blocking,
the thing is,
Pernell was good at that.
Yeah, what I really liked about Pernell is, yes, his head movement was amazing. He wasn't a big puncher, not to the head, but he was an amazing puncher to the body. When he punched to the body, it's different because he pitched it, I guess, in an uppercut or a hook-like fashion. And he learned to, one of the most important things to be a good puncher, if you're not a naturally a hard puncher, is learning how to engage the muscles at the right time. You have to be able to lock your body up. It's an intricate system coming from your core. So in learning how to transfer your weight, you need to learn to lock your body up so you get your body weight behind your punch, and it's not just an arm punch, which happens. Like people will throw, they'll throw their hooks like this, and that's an arm punch. You see my shoulder moving? It's loose there. When you lock that shoulder up, and as you know, when you lock that shoulder up and bring it with your body, you're putting whatever your upper body weighs, you're putting that weight behind it, and it's weight plus speed. That's what equals power, and that's where you get the knockouts from.
And I think you make a great point there about body punching. If you're not a great puncher, become a spiteful body puncher, because the good body puncher, a good body attack will make a puncher out of anybody, and then you can get KOs that way. I mean, I did a little bit of amateur boxing, as you know, and I was never a puncher, and never really even wanted to be, because I was so kind of seduced by the whole Ali and Sugar Ray kind of thing. Even though Sugar Ray was a puncher, but I didn't really focus on that. But the thing is, you can floor guys and stop guys with body shots, and you learn to really like that left hook to the liver, and you start feeling a little bit like you're a stronger puncher, because you see you have that effect on people, even though you're not taking guys out like Tommy Hearn. But
talking about as a puncher, right? There's one thing you have to do. I mean, you have to be willing to give it up, because you leave yourself susceptible. In order to knock somebody out, you need to plant. Generally, you need to plant and make yourself like a solid target as yourself. You could easily be counterpunched as well. So there's 6 of this, half a dozen of the other. It's not an easy thing to give up.
But so I don't know how important you feel the body attack might be for Joe Joyce, on Saturday night, but I definitely think he needs to get closer and to set an insane pace and stop pouring with the lead hand. Just use your jab. The southpaw nullifies your jab to a great extent anyway, you know that, but you still have to throw it. You still have to use it, regardless of what's coming behind it. And I think Joe Joyce needs to just be busy, throw a lot of punches, go forward, and try and take the range away from Zhang, and hope that he's not quite the same guy as he was. As I say, we've seen a few times Joshua Ruiz 2, totally different fight. Smith versus Eubank 2, completely different fight. Sometimes it gets reinforced, but it's not unheard of for a guy to turn things around.
Have the same trainers?
Huh?
Does he have he has the same trainer?
I believe he has the same trainer, Ismail Salas. I don't believe he sacked the trainer just because he lost the fight. No.
Yeah. You see, that's always interesting. I know you want to, dance with the person who brought you to the dance kind of thing, brought you to the party. I understand that, totally makes sense. But if his trainer from the first fight is the same trainer into the second fight, and they hadn't incorporated anything new, they're just going to try to get him in better shape, or you can't build a man's resiliency. You can't help him not swell clothes and break noses and all the rest of that kind of stuff and not cut. You can't do that. So hopefully they've been able to add put a few more tricks up his sleeve, and even more than tricks. I think what he needs to do is he needs to totally have his abilities refurbished. His punches are slow and predictable. After the left comes the right. After the right comes the left hook. Can't do that in boxing. And you can't do that with someone like Zhang. I mean, Zhang was counterpunching him confidently as early as the first round. First round in, he was catching him.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that was the thing. The writing was on the wall right from the word go in the first round. And he was nailing him with straight left hands and lead right hooks. It wasn't, his jab wasn't a huge factor, Zhang. We've got Wandrew says Zhang is too savvy and too quick. I love Joyce, but I think Zhang does it again. And he said he would love to see Fury versus Zhang.
How tall is Zhang? Zhang's a pretty big boy, isn't he?
Yeah, he is big. And you know what, Michael? Some people said Joyce came in uncharacteristically light for the fight. And some people cited that was his mistake and was a miscalculation. I suspect you've got very short shrift with that, because you think size and weight is overrated anyway.
Yeah, I absolutely do. Size and weight is overrated. It's all about the skills. You're not in a bench press. You're not Greco-Roman wrestling. You're not, Muay Thai. You're not doing any of that stuff. It's about these two things right here. And if you can make those two things miss, then the world is your oyster. That's how, in the day when we're talking about Harry Greb coming up from middleweight and beating heavyweights and coming back down to, Henry Armstrong going from lightweight and jumping up to welterweight.
Featherweight to welterweight.
Yeah, featherweight to welterweight, even more. So when we're talking about that, is because they know the only thing that opponent can hurt them with is the fist. That's the only thing.
What about Sugar Ray Robinson stepping up to fight Joey Maxim and finding it a step too far? Maybe that was because he only came in at 157 to fight a guy who was a solid 175 pounds.
No,
perhaps if Ray Robinson.
I tell you what, I bet you anything that Sugar Ray Robinson in training camp or in the gym would probably. I can't say, but would probably knock out any of the middleweights and light heavyweights he fought as a welterweight. When he was welterweight. Listen, I know fighters that are as featherweights that get in the ring and spar with middleweights, and they go at it. Like there's no holds barred. It's not like you're easing up the heavier fighters easing up on their punches. Like, no, these guys go at it. It's all about styles that make fights. When in this case, styles do make fights. So when you get in the ring with somebody and you're sparring, I mean, I've sparred when I was a featherweight, I sparred with heavyweights, and they're swinging for real. When I was middleweight, I was sparring with heavyweights right here in Gleason's. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're swinging for real at you, and cruiserweights and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So it's all about the knowledge in a fight itself. I mean, we need to keep everything all, I guess, as even. I don't even know how they ended up creating so many divisions in boxing. It almost feels like we can go back to the original, like
8
bantamweight, featherweight, welterweight, lightweight, welterweight, middleweight, and heavyweight.
Yeah, there was like eight divisions back in the day. They said that mostly there was only one champion. It's not true that there was never any political kind of divisions with sanctioning bodies back in the day. But for the most part, they only had one more champion at everyweight most of the time. And I believe from people who were around in those eras, they said every single one of those 8 guys was a household name known to the mainstream public. Before we keep going, Wandrew says, is there any actual footage of Greb fighting? I have to say there isn't. It's boxing's holy grail, Wandrew. And we did do another kind of thing on it before Sugar and Silk was inaugurated, didn't we? And that's one of the things. The historians are very high on Greb, and a lot of the more kind of practical guys, particularly fighters and trainers in the modern era, they're a little bit more skeptical about a guy they didn't see. But
and I have to say that's because you don't have. Well, I guess they have quotes from some great fighters, but
yes,
it's
paralleled.
Yeah, exactly. That speak very, very highly of him, and you have to respect that. But then there are a lot of fighters that tend to say things because it's politically correct, and you don't know what's coming from there.
Well, they didn't have political correctness in the 1920s, but you know what? You just reminded me before we keep going, before we get back on subject. You reminded me of something the other day when we had Montel Griffin on Friday night, and we were talking about his claim to be in the International Boxing Hall of Fame, and you said, "What do you think Roy Jones would say? Would he think you belong there?" And he said, "I've already asked him," and he says, "I do." And you said, "And that is everything." I didn't want to say it at the time, but I've got to tell you, it's not everything, because Roy Jones, 2 things, right?
Well, when I said everything, I did mean everything to him.
Yeah, of course.
Everything like
the reason why it's not everything is because Roy Jones doesn't necessarily know. Fighters horrendously lack perspective sometimes. However, there might have been Superman, but you asked for Floyd Mayweather for his top 10 fighters of all time, and it'll look like a fucking joke with him at the top of it, and it'll just be the silliest list ever. Not quite, but close. And also, Roy Jones. If I was talking if Montel Griffin texted me and I had that relationship with him, I was Roy Jones, I would find it very difficult not to say, "Yeah, man, you're a Hall of Famer for me," knowing that he'll probably never get inducted anyway. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but he possibly won't. And I would have to say that to him. I would find it too difficult not to say that to him. But I didn't want to say that Friday night for obvious reasons.
Well, Montel, obviously, is a very talented fighter. And we heard about his story and what he was been able to do in a relatively short period of time. With, he didn't have all the things behind him that you see a lot of these superstar fighters had. He had a lot of things hold him back. You know what I mean? Whether it was the people around him not having the right connects, people not looking out for him. Maybe he not looking out for himself as well as he could have. In retrospect. But that Hall of Fame, they're pretty. It's crazy, kind of like how they decide to put fighters in, because it's unlike anything else. Like you could say with a football player, okay, he gained 25,000 yards and he scored this many touchdowns, It has nothing to do with his personality. This has nothing to do with liking a guy.
Yeah.
It's everything to do with your performance. It's all numbers, right?
Yeah.
And with fighters, they don't do that. It's very much a popularity contest. You know what I mean? If a person reminds you of a beautiful time when you were sitting there on Saturday afternoon and watching TV and the fights were just everything, and he had a great fight and he wants, of course you're going to go that way and say, listen, I want to see this guy in the Hall of Fame.
Well, they don't all do it that way. To be fair, some of the historians have got a lot more of a reliable value base than that. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't get guys like Sam Langford in there, or even more obscure guys, like Herbert Hardwick, But someone like Getty is in, one would think, for popularity reasons. And some people say, listen, man, that's absolutely right. He should be there because he's iconic. But for me, it really is about who you beat, who you fought, who you beat, and the context of when you fought them and when you beat them and who beat you in your prime. And also longevity. The thing with Montel is I don't think he has the longevity to justify that position because he lost the title. He lost the world title he won straight away. But we spoke about that on...
we talked about that, and his strongest point is that he has 2 wins over James Toney and an exceptional James Toney. And, obviously, and then at the same time, you see, that's the thing with boxing. You're like, well, maybe JT at that time, he was a little bit on and off mentally. And if you were on mentally, he would have been able to.
Like Duran, right? Against Benitez or against Kermit.
Yeah. There are people who got wins against Duran that would not ever be in the Boxing Hall of Fame. In
the conversation, yeah. Well, Iran Barkley, who's also got a win over you, he's never in the conversation for greatness, but he beat Tommy Hearns twice.
And they gave him that one over me. They should never stop that fight. No, for real though. That's another bone of contention, right? Because Iran Barkley has fought everybody he's had to fight and would fight anybody. And what are the parameters? He moved up to heavyweight. He beat a former heavyweight champion.
Yeah, but come on, that was like some really sad affair. He beat Harry Kutsia, but God damn, that's
that's
about as meaningful as if
he came up from middleweight to do it. But he came up from middleweight to do it.
Well, sure, but but he fought the most shotters. That's like Nelson and Fennick meeting in their 90s, like they did, But what was I going to say? Wandrew has just asked, by the way, we've got to get back to Joe Joyce in a minute, but since we're talking about James Toney and Montel Griffin, he says he never actually saw either of the fights, and he asked for our opinion on who won because he believes they were controversial. I've got to say, I think Montel deserved the first fight, and I've got to admit that I didn't ever watch the second fight. I've only seen the first Tony Griffin fight.
Yeah.
But okay, so with Joyce, you're going to say, you know what? Just because I'm making a case for Joyce, I say I've got a gut feeling. I'm not saying that's what I would bet money on. I don't bet very often. I look at the odds constantly. I always look at odds because I find it interesting. And I also find looking at Sky Bet app, it's a good way to see the fight calendar and what's coming up. It's as good as any. So I talk about betting and odds a lot. I very seldom actually bet. Last time I had a bet, I believe there was one other one since, but last time I won a bet was in Chisora to beat Pulev at 6-1, which I thought was giving away money for Chisora on points. I did make another bet recently that I lost, so I can't even remember what it was. I don't remember losses. But I'm not saying for sure that I'm picking George to win. I just have I have a sneak feeling that this time it will turn around. One thing that
where does that come from? Let's delve into that for a second. Where does that feeling come from? Like,
you get them sometimes, right? I just think there'll be something like the way that Smith-Eubank thing played out, and it was like nothing like a similar fight. I've got a funny feeling that kind of thing will happen again. And Joyce's team obviously think he's going to win. If he doesn't win, where does that leave him, Michael? If he doesn't win on Saturday night, where does that leave Joyce?
It's the heavyweight division. It doesn't leave him shut out of the top 10, that's for sure, because it's kind of slim.
It did Tony Price, didn't he, when he had an immediate rematch against Tony Thompson and knocked him out the first time. Thompson knocked him out again. That was kind of the end of Price as a viable world-class contender, right?
Yeah. But it's also easy to climb back in. If you get all of a sudden, it's like you get a trainer that knows what he's doing, they'll turn you around and give you some new weapons and that people will have to deal with. Again, I'm saying I'm absolutely stunned when you tell me he had that kind of amateur career. How many fights did he have in the amateur?
You know what? Not many, Michael. He was one of them late starters. It only happens in the heavyweight division, doesn't it? Let's have it right. It only happens in the heavyweight division. They get a big athletic kid who's got the right attitude, who's got a little bit of something about him, and they focus on him. Next, they fast track him. He goes through the ABA championships with a load of walkovers. He bowls over a couple of guys in the semi-final and the final.
Yeah.
He gets on the national team. He wins a couple of qualifiers. But no, he got all the way to the final in Rio 2016, and he lost a very disputed decision to the point where, a bit like almost Roy Jones level of dispute, where people have talked about awarding him the gold medal because it's only right and proper. So George should be an Olympic champion, really, like George Foreman, Joe Frazier, and Muhammad Ali. That's crazy to you, right? To think.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it really tells you about. There's so many distractions, and two, there are so many other things like pulling away from the talented pool of potential boxers, basketball, football, soccer. I don't know. There's a million and one other things, or even just being a musician or a reader or a writer or anything. They pull away from boxing because boxing is probably it's lonely one, right? And it's very what word am I looking for? The fact that you lose and it's on you and there's nobody else you can blame and turn around. Plus, it makes you as a man look weak. When you've been defeated, automatically that stature as a man drops.
It's very brutal because there's so much pressure and the losses are so much more negative. It's said people say it all the time, but it's true. A football team, on either side of the Atlantic in either sport, they lose one.
Pass the blame around. There's enough blame to go around.
There is enough blame to go around, and it's not the end of the world. Some losses are more, damning than others, or more important than others, with higher stakes. But at the end of the day, you live to play another day. With boxing, losses can ruin you. Losses can stop you becoming a millionaire. They can stop you getting generational wealth, and they can kill you.
Yeah. I mean, a loss means you've taken a lot of punishment or taken punishment, basically. There's no way around it. If you lose, that means because you got punched in the face more times than the other guy.
Or else you got robbed.
Or else you got robbed, yeah.
So, if you're going to see, because I don't want to make a prediction, even though I'm making this case for Joyce, I was going to ask you to make a prediction for next Saturday. But I don't.
I'm seeing Zhang coming out the winner. I can't see it any different. I just can't because this Zhang looks like D'Artagnan and the other kid Joyce to me looks like this kid with like the wooden sword. You know what I mean? And it just from the fight that I saw, for there to be a turnaround, I would be like Scooby-Doo, huh?
I'd be like, what? I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to say it goes the distance this time.
Yeah.
And Joyce is a disputed points winner.
Okay, and so then I'll go the other way. And the first one ended in 6, right?
Yeah.
And I'll say, I mean, I don't like calling rounds on fighters because I don't know because it is hard.
No. Groups of rounds. Groups of rounds is much more sensible.
I absolutely respect Joyce and his love for the sport and his heart. He has tremendous heart. Listen, how many guys will take punches like that and he didn't show at any point like he was getting closer to Zhang. You know what I mean? He wasn't touching him up, he wasn't hurting him, he wasn't getting to him. The fight wasn't going to change, but he still was persistent. He took the punches. I don't even know how do you not even flinch? Like if you flinch, you'll make a guy miss a couple of times. He didn't even flinch.
He is extraordinarily tough. He's just one of those guys genetically. He's hard as nails, he's very, very strong.
And that's the thing, I mean, we all heard the song, I'd rather be a hammer than a nail. And that's exactly what Zhang was. Zhang was the hammer, he was the nail, and the hammer always wins that fight.
You know what, Silk? It wasn't completely one-sided. It wasn't like Joyce never had any success. Joyce had his connections and his successes. I just watched it again. He was definitely getting beat. Don't get me wrong. He was getting beat from round 1. But he had his little moments in the fight. It wasn't like he couldn't hit the guy at all.
So you're saying he had a moment that he had Zhang in trouble, or
no, not ever in trouble. No, but he was landing shots at certain points.
Yeah, but nothing significant, nothing that wobbled Zhang.
I wouldn't have said so. No, there was a couple of moments maybe when it was a decent looking shot from Joyce, but no, mostly it was just work rate and and volume.
You know, the thickness of your cranium makes a huge difference in terms of being able to take a punch. And I think Zhang and guys like, you know, Barkley, for instance, their skulls are just thicker than than most people's, and it just takes so much more to hurt him. That guy was like a rock. I was like, man, this guy's he was massive.
Some people just feel different like that way, don't you? When you hit them, you know when they seem to be dealing with a completely different kind of bone density. It's strange, you know. People seem more fragile. Wandrew, who's been talking to us throughout the show, said that two things. He asked, "Is this fight an eliminator for a title?" I don't precisely know. I certainly know that whoever wins the fight will put themselves in a good position.
But to fight who? Which one to fight?
I don't know because I can't remember. I believe Joe Joyce had who was the sanctioning body that Joe Joyce tended to be favoured with? The route he was going down and had the highest ranking with. I can't remember because, to be honest with you, I don't make it my business to be up on all this stuff because I've got a certain amount of contempt for the way things have gotten. Yes. So sometimes I struggle to keep track of it, and I almost want to ignore it in the way that Boxing News have taken an editorial policy now not to mention certain titles and belts and all the rest of it. But they were talking Usyk. They were talking about Joyce versus Usyk, right? And they did fight in the amateurs in the World Boxing Series back in the day. Yeah. So I would imagine it was for one of the three belts Usyk holds, not the WBC title that Fury holds, you know. But never mind, by the way, Michael, I want to say to you, never mind that Fury's got no intentions of fighting a boxer at any point between now and Doomsday, and he's fighting a debutant in his next fight. What I want you to, if it was your son, is he not allowed to make some money? You get it?
Which fight you
get what I'm doing? You see what I did there?
I see what you did there. I was like, this is all coming back to me, the trauma.
Yeah. For anyone who didn't see the show last week, I was joking. That was a pastiche. I should probably shut up before I get myself in trouble and create some kind of situation. I was just going to say Hagler had an extraordinarily thick skull too, Wandrew. That was exactly the one that sprang to mind, you know. But certainly, listen, if Joyce loses, it's a pretty bad indicator for his career going forward at the age he is, with the limitations that he's already been seen to have. Mm-hmm. So I think it is. I'm not saying it's his last chance, but I think his back is against the wall here, Michael. Yeah. His team obviously fancy it. Yeah.
You know, your trainer has to ask a lot of you. That's the only way you could learn and grow in boxing. If your trainer asks little of you, that's exactly what you're going to exhibit. Very few skills, and you're going to rely on your natural abilities. Some people are naturally hit hard. Some people naturally take a good punch. Some people have naturally good stamina. Some people burn out early. Whatever it is, there are these attributes in boxing that you have to sharpen. You have to cultivate. And when you don't cultivate them, they'll always catch up to you in a fight. Because one thing.
We're getting that clatter again, by the way.
Weakness, like nothing finds the weakness like boxing does, or fighting. Fighting, your weakness will always be found and tested, no matter what. Nobody gets out, unscathed.
What's that clatter in the background? We're getting it again now, and there's only me and you here.
I know
really? There's something that sounds like something like, or not quite that. It's fainter than that, but there's definitely some noise going on.
Oh, is it this?
Yeah, what is it?
Oh, it's my knee. Sorry about that.
Okay, let's try and see. This is where these are the little adjustments one needs to make to be better. This is where the trainer, the mentor's going to push you. You're a pretty good presenter with your own natural talent, but I want you to be the best presenter except for me. So let's keep the knee still. That's just something we need to focus on. Yeah. You know what? Let's talk about. So you can tell I almost don't believe it, but I'm saying that Joyce has a chance at reversing the results and maybe winning even a disputed points decision on his home ground next Saturday. Let's look at rematches historically. Whenever there were, some of the more iconic examples. Lewis Schmeling, I guess, is the most iconic example of a turnaround in a fight where he got badly beaten up in the first fight, stopped in 12 rounds in 1936, I believe it was. And then when they met again on June 22nd, 1938, it's one of the most legendary first-round KOs in the annals of the sport. When he took him out in 2 minutes and 4 seconds. So the difference with that was that Lewis had time to mature. He'd had time to correct his mistakes, and he had a whole bunch of fights in between. He knocked out good men like Jack Sharkey. In between, he beat James J. Braddock for the title. You know, it's funny because Michael, back then they were saying Schmeling should get the shot. That's fair. That's logical because as kind of cutthroat as it was and get a mob ruled as boxing was back then, they still had this sense of sporting logic that we've lost today. Then they were saying, why does the German not get the shot? Even in America, they were saying that because he beat Joe Louis. And as you know,
well, I think it had a lot to do with the Nazi Party itself. I mean, even though he wasn't a Nazi himself, being that he lived there, I guess they kind of assumed that he had to have been in order to, live successfully in Germany and not be a supporting element of them.
And as you know, Mike Jacobs, the legendary promoter, made a deal with Schmeling's manager, a guy called Joe Good. He said, if you fight, with Braddock's manager, a guy called Joe Good, he said, if you fight Lewis next and swerve the German, then I will. If you lose, I will give you 10% of my cut of Lewis's future purses for as long as he holds the title. It's going to be the best bit of business and passive income ever done in the history of boxing, because they didn't know Lewis would reign for 12 years and make 25 defenses.
And they got a bit of money from all those fights, right?
Me and you spoke about this on Facebook, and I showed you the passage from Lewis's autobiography. He wanted to clear it up. He says, everybody said Braddock had a piece of me. He said he had a piece of Mike's purse, not mine.
But I don't know. I just find it, knowing the nature of managers.
You said I bet that money came off the top in the first place.
They were skimming off the top. That's exactly what they do. Listen, they do that like. You would think your manager is, you know what I mean? Your manager is getting you fights and he gets paid for all that and everything. But like, you'll go to training camp and you think that money is going to come from either one, the promoter, or two, the manager's setting that up, and that's coming out of the manager's percentage. No, but they're taking it off the top of your purse. But so whatever it is, you're going to pay that back.
Bear in mind, Jacobs was the promoter. John Roxburgh and Julian Black were Lewis's managers, right? Okay. They were. But in a way, it's interesting that we can have these conversations, just go anywhere we want with it. But in actual fact, we're supposed to be talking about the fights that were reversed and the fights that where the original result played out more or less the same. So that's one example where, but there was certainly, it wasn't an immediate rematch where that happened. You look at Ali Fraser, that was a pretty different fight the second time. I always thought Ali won it handily. I like to think that's how Ali would have won it without the inactivity that was forced upon him.
Although it wasn't for the title.
It wasn't for the title, no, because Fraser had already been bounced around like a basketball by George Foreman. But it wasn't for the title, no. So that fight was interesting, wasn't it? Because the second fight, the Ali Fraser fight in January 1974 at the Garden, it was Ali kind of cruised it. It was still a tough fight, but he kind of cruised it and didn't really.
It was nothing like the first fight or the third fight. Oh my God!
Exactly, or the third fight. Exactly. That's the interesting thing about that one.
That was one of the most brutal fights over 15 rounds that I've ever. I mean, the first fight was brutal too. I mean, no bones about it. There's no. I don't know of very many people at all who had that kind of pain tolerance, discomfort. And your lungs are screaming to get out your chest. If everything you're feeling, the gloves in those days, you're feeling nothing but bare knuckle hitting you, flushing every time you're getting hit. You know what I mean? Like, 8-ounce gloves, no cushion on the knuckles. You know what I mean? And the guy's 215, 220 pounds and hitting you, over 3 minutes, 15 times in a row, 15 3-minute rounds. That's just insane.
I got to tell you that I don't like the third fight, the Thriller in Manila. I just don't like to watch it. I love Ali as much as you do, and I prefer to watch the first damn fight. That's how much I don't like the third one.
Right, and he lost that one. Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? I don't know. I just feel much more comfortable. And in a good place watching that first fight and being proud of the effort that Ali put up anyway than I do watching them both go to the place they had to go to in Manila. It's disturbing. So all right, another example of a rematch where it was absolutely reinforced as a disastrous idea was Foreman and Fraser. That they fought again in 1976.
Yes.
Fraser shaved his head,
Mhm.
and the adjustment. That's one kind of aesthetic adjustment he made, and he was trying to box, wasn't he? He was trying to not get involved with him, which is always doomed to failure.
Yeah. That's another fight that, I mean, I like Joe Frazier a lot, and I love George too. I mean, all the fighters in the 70s, I don't know, it's almost like maybe I didn't understand personalities and characters as I do today, but the way I looked at them fighting in those days, I just looked at fighting differently. Maybe
It probably had more magic to you. It probably held more magic for you then as a youngster.
yeah, I'm
Looking
sure it
at
did. I'm
it.
sure it did. That mystique and the gladiator-esque thing of it, like men willing to put their whole life on the line and go at it like that. And plus, when you're young, you're hearing adults talk about it like it's the greatest thing. You know what I mean? So you hold even higher reverence for those opinions alone. But yeah, Joe came out. I think he tried to, like, by going bald, he thought that would intimidate George. You
Imagine.
know,
Well,
that's kind of
maybe
like
he figured
you're
it gave
digging
him a
deep
little.
into the barrel when it comes, when it comes to that.
Maybe he figured it'd give him a couple of millimeters grace when he's trying to move his head out of the way of those broadsides, the big hooks and the big
Yeah,
uppercuts.
yeah,
Perhaps he
you
thought I
hope
could
to get
split
in
them.
there.
It was that little bit of hair that was getting me caught. I don't know.
Oh my God, I don't know, but yeah, George, that was even more devastating, that performance, wasn't it?
You know what? It wasn't more devastating, and he lasted a little longer that time. That's 5 rounds, as I recall, Fraser. But it was just desultory. Because remember, Foreman wasn't quite the same beast either because he'd already lost. He had that kind of the psyche was damaged by the Ali loss. You
Yeah.
said you say often that once people know how to beat you, that there's something has gone from a fighter who's not undefeated anymore. The
Yeah.
word is out on you to a degree, even if
Yeah.
it's only Ali who can do it. And I've heard plenty of respected boxing judges say that they think the only guy that can beat the peak version of Foreman is Ali. And
Yeah.
I know Frank Lotierzo, a pretty good analyst, says that Foreman should never have listened to guys like Gil Clancy who convinced him he needed to pace himself and he needed to get more wind and he needed to, he said he should have just been the absolute marauding destroyer that he was, knowing that nobody besides Ali could have had the kryptonite for it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he was shades of himself when he fought Jimmy Young, and I'm sure there was a lot of psychologically he really, I mean, because he was this juggernaut from the amateurs, right? All the way
Yeah, well, you
through.
look at the Olympics, and he was just this force of nature. But he
Yeah.
was compared to they compared Joe George to George. By the way, you know that when he first came out, they made those comparisons for the amateurs and the pros, which it's
Between George and Listen, did you say?
no between Joe Joyce and George Foreman. That's
Oh,
who
no
Joe
way.
Joyce. Since the show is kind of about him, that's who he was compared to.
You can't do that. No way. I mean, George has this ability to just let his hands go. I mean, that alone right there tells you about a fighter's psyche. People who are hesitant for a reason. They think they're not going to be successful, or they think they're going to be on the receiving end of a counterpunch, or they think there's something painful is going to come back at them, so they don't, throw the punch. But hesitation, once they get you hesitating in a fight, you've lost. George Foreman had the ability to throw the trigger and punch through your punches. I didn't see that with this kid, Joe Joyce. I'm sorry, I didn't see it. George, I know Ali called him the mummy, and you know what I mean. He's very stiff and predictable. And here comes the right, here comes the left, and that's true for someone of Ali's vision. But Joe Joyce is like, it's almost like his fighting has no personality. Like his personality is not in it. He's doing what his coaches have taught him to do.
Robotic.
Robotic, but yes, exactly. He does what his coaches have taught him to do, and there's no creativity. They're not giving him any like he can't vary. He can't go to the left and open up more a certain thing, or to the right. He can only do what he's been programmed to do, And that's his biggest problem. Because with fighters, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to give them the weapons, load them up on a jab, and how many different ways you can throw that. The right hand, the left hook, the uppercut, and learn to put them together in combination. Now start learning to put them together in combinations that you design yourself. Not I don't tell you 5-4-3-2 and you go in and do that at 5-4-3-2 because the timing changes. Yeah, it works on the pads, perfect. It works on the pads. Everything's where it's supposed to be, when it's supposed to be there. But in a fight, that's not true. When you throw the jab, you hit the guy. The guy's head's going to be further back than or maybe he gets hit and then he's going to move his head to the left. So it throws off your natural rhythm that these guys have been training you to, 4, 5, 6, 7. And you go in there and you throw a 4. He's there for 4, but he's not there for 5, 6, 7. He's not around. And that's why, like someone like Floyd Mayweather and Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns and James Toney and all these other great fighters is because they're able to, like, they feel at a different level. They understand like the nuances of boxing and how like to be they're creative fighters that can create in the moment, on the spot, take your advantage and turn it into a disadvantage for you. That's what's so beautiful and great about those guys. And that's why fighters like Joe Joyce, for instance, are always going to stay there because his coaches haven't taught him to be an independent thinker. You have to be an independent thinker in the ring because everything is immediate. If you mess up, punishment is immediate. If you do something good, yeah, that's immediate too, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be able to adapt, I think, and you've got to do it on feel, which is why, Michael, I know you like busting myths and cliches and stuff and putting them under the microscope. Everybody said boxing's like chess. I don't see how it's similar, really, because, chess, you can sit at a table and take it, I don't know, as long as you like to make a move.
Yeah.
Like
there's no pain involved, that's for sure.
Say again?
There's no pain involved, that's for sure.
Nah, not ordinarily, unless it's really a game of chess.
But I do think in a lot of ways, like strategically, how you use the players themselves, there are quite a few similarities to boxing. For instance, your pawns are your jab. They're plentiful. There are many of them, and you use them often, right?
Yeah.
And so they're your jab, and your the rook is your like straight power punch, for instance.
Yeah,
it's very direct and it's going one way, right? And your bishop is more like your uppercut.
Yeah, I was good. Yeah, and the knights are the hooks because they come out like this.
And your queen is your power punch.
Power punch, whatever your favorite punch.
Exactly, and can do anything and everything. Your king is your resiliency.
Yeah, your chin.
The king is your resiliency. As long as your king isn't caught, you're resilient, right?
We've gone from me saying I don't think it's similar because you have to make second decision in the ring, which renders the comparison completely obsolete. So I'm actually really feeling this now. This is quite fascinating, and it's amazingly similar to boxing. Actually, I see that now. Offensively, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
because all those punches have got offensive names. Yeah,
exactly. Well, defense. Really, when you're in a fight, it's very important to be able to defend yourself. And by the best defense is a great offense, they say, right? But when stuff's coming back at you, your defense is your king. It's being able to protect him, and he shouldn't have to take any shots. You never want to hear check. You never want to hear checkmate, right?
So there's no body punches in chess, no? There's no body punches really, or is there?
Right. Well, those hooks and those uppercuts can be seen as uppercuts to the body or to the head.
Yeah.
They hurt either way.
Yeah. Wanderer, who's been our chief kind of fan on this particular show, he's asked what our views are on reintroducing same-day weigh-ins. I have to say that I would be in favour of it, but I don't see. I understand why they.
You said you are. You're not, Ben. You are.
I would be in favour of it. Yeah, I understand why they moved them the day before. From a.
Why do you think they moved them?
Huh?
Why do you think they moved them?
Because, there's two things, right? One is that fighters were boiling down dangerously to make weight, and they figured, I do think it was well-intentioned that they give them an extra day to rehydrate, et cetera, et cetera. I think there were some safety, good intentions there. I think now that they've done it, and people are exploiting it the way they are. People have become attached to that. I also feel, from a promotional marketing point of view, it gives them an extra day to sell the pay-per-view for a big fight, and I think that's. But I don't think they did it in the first place with that in mind. I don't think that's why it started.
Well, the thing is, look, if they use it for promotion the day before, you could do something else the day before and promote it with your fighters because they're in town anyway. So the weigh-in, yeah, okay. What about just like sitting at a table and both of them start talking to each other and
have
blah, blah,
the
blah.
final press conference? Well, you know what the model is nowadays in Britain, certainly with Matchroom shows and Frank Warren shows. They'll usually have, if the fight's on Saturday, they'll usually have a public workout on the Wednesday. They'll have a final press conference on the Thursday where they're all behind the table saying what they're going to say, up on the days. Then they'll have a weigh-in on Friday and obviously the fight Saturday. So in theory, they could have a public workout on the Thursday or whatever. It's still on the Wednesday. They could final pressure on the Friday.
There are many ways to promote it. I think what they just take away the prestige and the I don't know, they take the luster, you know what I mean? They just dull in the sport. They dumb it down. And again, it's so important that when they step into the ring, that two fighters should be even. Giving a guy a day or 2 days to get his weight back up to, listen, that's your fault. Go back into another division. You should not be afforded the right to be able to.
Welterweights ain't welterweights today, and middleweights ain't middleweights, and so on. You can go up and down the line. But even worse than that. Never mind the trouble with boxing for me, and the sanctioning bodies today and the powers that be, not content with making a ludicrous bastardization of the sport to begin with, they push it further. Like, instead of not content with having different, 4 different titles, the WBL start inventing their own degrees of world championship at the same weight. And also with the weigh-in, not content with having it the same day, which some people might not approve of for the reasons that you just cited, they start having real weigh-ins at 10 in the morning and a cosmetic weigh-in at 1 o'clock when the fighters have already ate and drank and they've already done everything they have to do, and they're not even the weight they said they were that they're going to read out.
Well, they're trying to make it more comfortable for the fighter, right? They're trying to make it more. They say they're trying to make it more comfortable for the fighter, and then use it to their own benefit as well. And I can understand that, but it's not about your comfort. Fighters, it's not about your comfort. This is such a simple rule. And a fairness that's been thought out thoroughly over decades or even a century. You know what I mean? It's been thought out evenly and fair. What you weigh going into the ring. In fact, really, you should weigh what you weigh. You should be able to jump on the scale an hour before the fight, and what you weigh go in the ring and fight. You know what I mean? That's the way it should go. It should go closer to the time when you get into the ring.
That's what we did in the amateurs, right? You went to a show in the amateurs in the daytime or the evening. You got on the scales and you boxed an hour later, or maybe an hour and a half later.
Exactly. But convenience. Everybody wants to make everybody happy and all the rest of these things. I understand that. But at least you have to hold on to the day. You keep giving. Like, we just keep giving in, and all of a sudden it's not going to resemble the first thing it was meant to resemble in the first place.
Yeah, and that's the same argument when you get the YouTube boxers and, this will be good. Logan Paul, who it was first, this will bring eyes to the sport. Does it bollocks? It doesn't bring eyes to the sport. Nobody goes, to see New Kids on the Block and then suddenly starts watching the Velvet Underground the next week. It doesn't work that way. And, but that's what they said it would be. It'd be good for the sport, it'd be good for the exposure. Look at the nonsense we've got now. And you get it, like you say, with that weigh-ins the day before. Now they're having weigh-ins, they're having secret closed weigh-ins at 10 a.m. or 9 a.m., like with Lomachenko and Haney, and then they're having a pretend weigh-in, a kind of prosthetic weigh-in later on at lunchtime for the cameras. And, and guys are obviously gaining 15 and 20 pounds and so on, and it becomes part of the, like I say, when you look at guys like Sugar Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns, when they fought in 1981, they were welterweights, they really were. And they probably only gain 4 or 5 pounds between the lunchtime weigh-in and the first belt.
They think this is all they call this advancement in boxing, and it's not advancement at all. I think it distracts from. I think it takes away from that not even like it takes away from the heart of the sport. It takes away from the difficulty of the sport. It takes away from the yeah, it's dangerous. It's all those things, and those kinds of things. You know what? If you take away its charisma, you take away its what word am I looking for? I'm searching through a foggy mind. Y- it just deserves to be like respected for what it is, for what it really is. Yes, it's a hurting sport. It's a sport that hurts, and the intent is to hurt. From bell one, yeah, when the bell rings, the intent is to separate a man from his consciousness. That's
Yeah.
it. And
We're, we're still getting that knee thing, by the way, a lot of times in that last 60
my
seconds.
knee.
That
Oh no.
knee clatter was happening a lot.
Okay,
We've
I'm
got
gonna talk to my doctor, and I'll get it taken care of.